Today, I'll use the recent events in Syria as a case study to explore the Hobbesian reality I described in my previous video by trying to explain why is the Syrian regime was so unbelievably brutal to its own people. Just recently, as the Sunni rebels have claimed a major victory, taking control of Syria, the world also saw some shocking images from the oppression that was part of the Syrian regime, under the rule of Bashar al-Assad. Most notorious and shocking images came from the Saydnaya prison, images of torture, murder, and attempts to cover up the evidence. These events raise a huge question. What drives a government to treat its citizens like this? Let's break it down. What's going on in the Middle East? First, let's talk about how many governments in the Middle East are set up. In countries like Syria, there's often a small, privileged group, like Assad's Alawite minority, that holds all the power and wealth and receive the human liberties. Meanwhile, the majority of people, in this case the Sunni Arab population, are left out. This imbalance creates constant frustration and tension. Think about it. If most people feel left behind while a small group lives in luxury, you're going to get resentment. And when resentment grows, it threatens those in power. So what do these regimes do? They go hard on their citizens. Like I mentioned, the structure of Syria's regime is extreme, even by Middle Eastern standards. But it's not entirely unique. Across the region, we see a shared Hobbesian dynamic. A small group of privileged elites controls the political and economic system, while the majority of citizens are left without basic freedoms or opportunities. Authoritarian regimes dominate the Middle East, with no exceptions, outside of Israel, which will dedicate a separate lecture to it. Even in countries like Lebanon or Turkey, where there's a semblance of democracy, true democratic principles like freedom of the press or independent judicial systems are absent. Take Iran, for example, where a religious autocracy governs with an iron fist, or the Gulf states, which run soft dictatorships. In these countries, the ruling elites are sustained by vast oil revenues, living in luxury while millions of foreign workers from South and Southeast Asia perform the labor that keeps their economies running. These workers are often subjected to poor conditions and lack basic rights, underscoring the imbalance of power. Jordan's Hashemite monarchy must constantly maneuver within a Sunni Palestinian majority to retain power. In Egypt, the military and political establishment are deeply intertwined, creating a regime that suppresses dissent through a combination of fear and control. These systems all share one goal: preserving the elite's grip on power, regardless of the toll it takes on their populations. How do they keep control? Middle Eastern regimes have a few tools they rely on to stay in charge, no matter how unpopular they are. Let's look at three big ones. 1. Religious education. They use religion as a way to keep people obedient. Instead of encouraging questions or debate, they teach people to accept things as they are. 2. Distraction. They shift attention away from domestic problems by pointing to external enemies, like Israel. It's a way of saying, don't look at us, look over there. 3. Fear and force. This is where things like Saydnaya prison come in. The regime uses brutal violence to scare people into silence. The message is clear: speak out and you'll pay a heavy price. A Hobbesian reality. This brings us to what I'd call the Hobbesian mentality. In a Hobbesian world, everyone's out to survive, and fear drives almost every decision. In the Middle East, regimes act like they're always under threat, so they respond with force, suspicion, and alliances that only serve their interests. It's a vicious cycle. Fear fuels repression, repression fuels resistance, and it just keeps going. Why is Syria so extreme? Now, let's talk about why Syria is such an extreme case. Assad's regime isn't brutal just for the sake of it. It's a calculated move. They believe that without this level of control, they'd lose everything. To them, violence and fear are survival tactics. But for the people suffering under this system, it's a living nightmare. The tragedy of the Hobbesian mentality. One of the great tragedies of this dynamic is that leaders in such a system often feel compelled to wield power and fear against their own populations to maintain control. This perpetuates cycles of oppression and resistance, locking societies into a state of instability. In extreme cases, as seen in Syria, this approach leads not only to suffering, but also to complete societal collapse. Answering the question, so why is the Syrian regime so brutal? The answer lies in how it uses oppression as its sole tool of control. Unlike other authoritarian regimes in the Middle East that balance fear with some form of rewards to maintain stability, the Syrian regime relies entirely on intimidation and suppression towards the oppressed majority. This makes it an extreme case where domination becomes the only strategy for the privileged ruling minority to hold on to power. These are tough topics, but they're important to understand. If you found this helpful or want to keep the conversation going, please leave your comment below. It could spark an interesting dialogue. Until next time.